A story of promise, protection, and the walls we choose to come down from. The baby was crying when Rosa arrived at the gate. Not the soft, mewling cry of a newborn still adjusting to the cold shock of the world. This was the desperate, lung-emptying wail of a child who had been crying for a very long time, whose small body had spent the last hour communicating its hunger and its cold and its confusion to a woman who could do nothing but hold him tighter and keep walking. Rosa Medina pressed the infant against her chest with both arms, her knuckles white around the bundle of worn flannel blanket, her feet bare on the rain, slicked cobblestones outside the iron gate of the Vega estate. It was 2:17 in the morning. She had walked 6 miles. The bruise above her left eye had swollen shut sometime in the 3rd mile. She had noticed it the way you notice things when your attention is elsewhere. As a fact, filed, not yet felt. The cut on her lip had bled twice, and she had wiped it on the shoulder of her jacket without slowing down. Her feet were bleeding. She had removed her shoes somewhere around the 2nd mile, after the left heel buckled sideways on a cracked sidewalk, and the decision had seemed simple at the time: shoes or speed, and she needed speed. She had not looked back once. The security camera above the gate swiveled toward her with the slow mechanical certainty of something that had been designed to see everything and miss nothing. Rosa looked directly into it. She had thought about this moment for 3 weeks, had imagined it the way you imagine difficult conversations, running through versions, rehearsing what she would say, how she would hold herself, what expression she would keep on her face. She had decided straight, shoulders back, eyes open, the kind of stillness that says I am not a threat and I am not afraid and I have come too far to be turned away at the last step. She stared into the camera. "My name is Rosa Medina," she said, loud enough to be heard over the rain and the baby's crying, loud enough to be heard by whatever man or woman was sitting behind a monitor somewhere inside that enormous estate watching a soaked woman with a bruised face hold an infant on the street at 2 in the morning. "I worked in this house for 3 years. My employee number was 472. I left 18 months ago. My supervisor was a woman named Dota Pitra who is very likely still there and will remember me." A pause. For the camera, for whoever was watching. "I need to speak to Mr. Vega. I know what hour it is, I know what I'm asking. The baby's name is Mateo. He is 8 weeks old, and I believe, I am almost certain, that he belongs to your employer." The gate did not open. The rain kept falling. The baby kept crying. Rosa pressed her lips to the infant's wet forehead and whispered something that was not a prayer and not quite a promise. Something in between, the kind of words women say when they have run out of options and refuse to run out of hope. She had been awake for 31 hours. Her arms ached from holding Mateo through the long walk. The cut above her eye had bled into her vision twice, and she had wiped it away with the edge of the blanket each time, careful not to disturb the child. She had eaten nothing since the previous afternoon. She stood at the gate and she waited. 1 minute. 2. 3 minutes passed with the rain falling and the baby's cries beginning to subside from exhausted wailing into exhausted hiccuping, the particular rhythm of a child who has cried past the point of tears and arrived at the mechanical repetition of grief. Then the gate opened. The man who met her in the entrance hall was not Alejandro Vega. It was Thomas. She recognized him immediately, having spent 3 years learning the geography of this household the way a sailor learns a coastline, by attention and repetition and the knowledge that the difference between safe harbor and shipwreck is often knowing exactly where you are. Thomas was Alejandro Vega's head of security, a wide-shouldered, close-cropped former military man of approximately 55 who moved through rooms the way water moves through pipes, efficiently without waste, following the path of least resistance toward whatever destination had been decided in advance. He had an expression that revealed nothing, which Rosa had always thought was not a natural face but a practiced one, the face of a man who had learned that showing nothing was a form of protection. He looked at her the way a locked door looks. Unmoved, deliberate, designed to keep things out. "You need medical attention," he said. His eyes had already catalogued everything. The bruise, the lip, the bare feet, the blood on the cobblestones she had tracked in through the door. "I need to speak to Mr. Vega," Rosa said. "Mzet. Vega is Tums." The voice came from the top of the grand staircase, and it arrived in the entrance hall the way important voices arrive in large spaces. It did not have to travel far before it filled the room, low, unhurried, carrying the particular weight of a man who has spent decades understanding that volume is not the same as authority, and that the most powerful statement a powerful person can make is the one delivered quietly. "Let her in." Rosa looked up. Alejandro Vega stood at the top of the stairs in a dark robe, his hair slightly disheveled in the way of a man pulled from sleep, or from the pretense of sleep. She suspected the latter, because the quality of his alertness was too complete for someone recently woken. One hand rested on the banister. He was 38 years old, and he looked it in the way that some men do, not aged by time so much as carved by it, the softness of youth burned away by years of decision and consequence until only the essential remained. He was not a conventionally handsome man. His nose had been broken twice and had healed slightly off-center. There was a scar along his jaw that ran from just below his left ear to the corner of his chin, a clean, deliberate line that told a story Rosa had never been told and had the sense never to ask about. His eyes were dark and extraordinarily still. He was looking at the baby. His face gave nothing away. This was a face trained to give nothing away, a face that had given nothing away for the better part of 4 decades. But something moved behind his eyes. Something tectonic, too deep to reach the surface, too large to be contained entirely, the way the evidence of an earthquake is felt in the trembling of things before the ground has actually broken. He descended the stairs. Rosa did not move. She stood in the entrance hall with rain still dripping from her clothes onto the marble floor in a steady, quiet percussion, holding the sleeping, finally, exhaustedly sleeping, infant, and she watched Alejandro Vega come toward her. She had rehearsed this too, what it would feel like to stand in this space again, in front of this man, after the 18 months she had spent as far from both as she could manage. She had thought she would feel small. She had thought the old hierarchy would reassert itself, employer and employee, powerful and powerless, the man who owned the house and the woman who had cleaned it. She did not feel small. She felt, with a clarity that surprised her, like someone standing on the only ground available, holding the only thing that mattered, doing the only thing left to do. He stopped 3 feet away from her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The entrance hall held its breath around them. The ticking of the grandfather clock near the door, the barely audible sound of Mateo breathing against her chest. "His name is Mateo," Rosa said. Her voice was steady. "His mother was Lucia Reyes. She died 9 days ago. Postpartum hemorrhage. She was alone in her apartment when it happened. I found her when she didn't answer my calls." She paused, swallowed the thing that was trying to rise in her throat, the grief she had been managing by putting it in a box marked later and refusing to open the box until Mateo was safe. Before she died, she had time, not much but some. She told me who his father was. She made me promise to bring him here. Alejandro's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, the only movement on his face. "Lucia Reyes," he said, as though he were testing the sound of the name, checking it against some interior file. She was a seamstress. She worked from home, alterations mostly, some original pieces. She lived in Colonia San Rafael on Cal Mimosa, 3rd floor, apartment 8. Rosa paused. "You met her 14 months ago at the Garza wedding. The Garza family. They're clients of yours, I believe. The wedding was at the Hacienda Palmares, the 2nd weekend of October. There was a rainstorm that night too. She sheltered under an overhang near the gardens in U." She stopped. She had not been there. She was recounting what Lucia had told her, which meant she was reconstructing intimacy she hadn't witnessed. And the delicacy of that felt important to acknowledge. She described it as an accident that became something else. She said 3 days. Something crossed Alejandro's face, gone before it could be identified, but there. "She didn't know who you were when you met," Rosa continued. "The name Vega. It didn't connect immediately. She was not from a world where that name means what it means to people in certain other worlds. By the time she understood who you were, she was already." She chose simpler words. "She had already decided to manage alone. She was afraid to contact you. She didn't know how you would receive the news. She didn't want anything from you. No money, no acknowledgement, no claim. She just wanted to raise her child in peace, and she thought the safest way to do that was quietly, without involving. And yet here you are," Alejandro said. "And yet here I am," Rosa said. "Because she's dead and he's alive and she made me promise. And I keep my promises, Mr. Vega. Even to the dead. Especially to the dead." Alejandro looked at the child for a long time. The infant slept with the absolute abandon of the very young, face slack, lips slightly parted, small fists curled against his cheeks. Alejandro looked at him with the expression of a man looking at something he had not expected, and does not yet have the vocabulary for. Then he looked at Rosa, really looked at her, slowly, taking in the full inventory of what the night had cost her. The bruise and the split lip and the bare feet and the blood tracking the floor, and the 6 miles of rain still present in every soaked inch of her clothing. "What happened to your face?" he asked. Rosa hesitated for only a moment. "The man who was supposed to drive me here wanted money I didn't have. There was a disagreement. I walked instead. It was true. It was not the whole truth. The whole truth involved the man grabbing Mateo's blanket, and what Rosa had done to prevent him from taking the baby, and the response that had earned her the bruise." Alejandro Vega, who had built an empire and preserved it on the ability to distinguish partial truths from complete ones, said nothing about the part she left out. Not because he believed she'd told him everything, but because he understood, perhaps, that some truths belonged to the person who earned them. Instead he turned to Tom's. "Call Dr. Esperanza," he said, the particular quiet of his voice when he had already decided something. "Tell her it's urgent. For both of them." A pause. "And bring dry clothes for the woman. Something from the guest linen if nothing else." Thomas moved immediately and without comment. This was, Rosa had remembered from 3 years of observation, the particular quality of the relationship between Alejandro Vega and his head of security. Tom's executed, and in executing, endorsed. He did not do things he considered wrong. The speed of his movement was a kind of endorsement. Alejandro looked at the baby one more time. "Come," he said to Rosa. "Sit somewhere warm." The guest room on the second floor was larger than the apartment Rosa had shared with 2 cousins and a grandmother for the first 18 years of her life. Larger than the room she had rented for the 3 years she worked at the Vega estate. Larger, she was fairly certain, than the combined floor space of everything she had ever called home. The bed was made with the precision of a room that is always ready, and the lamps threw a warm amber light, and someone, Tom's, she assumed, moving efficiently in the background of everything as he always had placed a folded set of clothes on the chair by the window, gray and soft, clearly borrowed from the household's considerable reserves of guest provisions. She stood in the center of the room with Matteo against her shoulder. He was asleep again, had gone back to sleep somewhere between the entrance hall and the second-floor landing, the way very young infants fall asleep, suddenly, completely, as though someone had switched off a light. His weight was warm and specific against her chest. She had been holding him for so many hours that she had stopped noticing the weight and started noticing only the warmth. And she thought, this is how it happens. This is how Lucia fell in love with him before he was even born. Not as a decision but as an accumulation of small warmths. Dr. Esperanza arrived within 20 minutes. She was a brisk, compact woman in her mid-50s with silver, streaked hair pinned efficiently at the back of her head, and the manner of someone who has been called to inconvenient situations at inconvenient hours, often enough that she has made her peace with it. She asked no unnecessary questions. She examined Matteo with the practiced efficiency of someone who knows exactly what she is looking for and exactly how quickly she needs to find it. Weight, temperature, responsiveness, all checked against some interior standard, all producing a small nod that Rosa correctly interpreted as acceptable. Then she turned to Rosa. "Sit on the bed." Rosa sat. The doctor's hands were gentle and matter of fact. She examined the orbital bone around the bruised eye, pressed along it with 2 fingers in a systematic path, watching Rosa's face, and said, "Bruised, not fractured. It will hurt for another week and look frightening for 2. She examined the split lip, cleaned it, placed a single neat stitch. She looked at Rosa's feet last, and here her efficiency slowed slightly into something more careful. "You walk quite a distance?" she said. "Without shoes. For part of it." Esperanza cleaned the cuts on Rosa's feet without commenting further on the circumstances that had produced them. This silence felt, to Rosa, like a particular kind of respect, the acknowledgement that some circumstances explain themselves without narration. "You're very brave," the doctor said finally when she was done. It was not a compliment exactly. It was the diagnosis of a woman who had been assessing courage professionally for 30 years and knew it when she saw it, even when it arrived bruised and barefoot at 2 in the morning. Rosa said nothing. She watched Matteo, who had been placed in the center of the enormous bed, sleeping with the absolute unconscious authority of infants, his tiny fists curled against his cheeks, his chest rising and falling with the small steady rhythm that Rosa had been monitoring with one part of her attention for 8 weeks. He looked like his mother around the eyes, that particular softness. The slight upturn at the outer corners that had made Lucia Reyes look perpetually as though she were on the verge of smiling, as though she knew something privately amusing about everything. It was not a resemblance that hit you immediately. It arrived slowly, the way the truth of things often does. First you saw an infant, and then you saw Lucia, and then you understood that this was what love leaves behind when it goes. Rosa had loved Lucia Reyes with the fierce, uncomplicated loyalty of a woman who has found a true friend in a life that did not distribute them generously. They had met at the commercial laundry service, where Rosa worked before the Vega household hired her. Both of them young and broke and laughing too loudly at things that were not really funny, which is the particular coping mechanism of women who understand that the alternative to laughing is the other thing, and the other thing is a luxury for women with more time than they have. They had become friends the way people become friends when they have nothing much but each other and don't see that as a deficiency. Saturday afternoons at Lucia's kitchen table, drinking coffee so weak it was essentially ambition with water, eating whatever was cheap and close and Lucia had managed to make interesting by some alchemy of seasoning and optimism. Long phone calls during the commute, the specific intimacy of knowing someone's whole inventory, their fears, their embarrassments, the things they wanted and had never said out loud, the things that had happened to them that they had never quite recovered from. Lucia had been warm. This was the word Rosa always arrived at when she tried to describe her. Not beautiful, though she was, not funny, though she could make Rosa laugh until her stomach hurt, but warm, in the specific and irreducible way of people who have been through difficult things, and come out the other side with more softness rather than less, people who choose, consciously or not, to remain open. Rosa had watched Lucia grow round and frightened and then brave and then radiant, the strange, particular radiance of a woman who has decided to face something enormous alone and discovered, in the facing of it, that she is larger than she thought. She had watched Lucia make the apartment on Cal Mimosa into a home curtained soon from fabric she'd found at a market stall. A mobile hung above the second-hand crib, a small shelf of board books that Matteo would not be able to read for years, but that Lucia had arranged anyway, alphabetically, because she believed in starting as you mean to go on. She had watched Lucia love her child before he was born, love him while he was being born, love him with an intensity in those first 8 weeks that was almost frightening to witness. The way some loves are frightening, not because they are too much but because they are too true, because they have found the frequency that everything else was trying to approach. And then, on a Tuesday morning in early spring, Rosa had arrived at Cal Mimosa because Lucia had not answered 3 calls in a row, and she had found what she found, and she had held her friend's hand for the last hour, and she had listened to the last words spoken in a voice that had already become something less than a voice, and she had made the promise. She had kept it. Try to sleep, Dr. Esperanza said, closing her bag with the decisive snap of someone who has done all she can and is leaving the rest to time. Both of you are stable. I'll check in the morning. She paused at the door. Someone will bring food. Eat it even if you're not hungry. Your body has been through something tonight. Rosa nodded. The door closed. She lay down beside Matteo on the enormous bed, still in the dry clothes that had been brought. Too large, cinched at the waist, warm in the specific way of fabric that has been laundered many times, and placed one hand lightly against his back so she could feel his breathing, and looked at the ceiling of the most expensive room she had ever occupied. She should have slept. Her body had been requesting sleep for many hours with increasing urgency. Instead, she lay in the warm quiet and looked at the ceiling and thought about what she had done and what would come next and whether she had been right. She had been right. She knew she had been right. The question of whether you have been right and the question of whether you are afraid can coexist without resolving each other. She was afraid, not of Alejandro Vega specifically. She had spent 3 years in close proximity to his world, close enough to understand its edges, and she had decided before she walked through his gate tonight that she was more afraid of failing Lucia than she was of anything his world could produce. But she was afraid of the next morning, and the decisions that would be made in it, and whether the decision would be the right one for this small person breathing under her hand. She closed her eyes. She did not sleep, exactly. But she rested. Alejandro Vega sat in his study for the remainder of the night and thought about Lucia Reyes. He did not drink, though the decanter was within arm's reach and had been opened and closed by him in this room through many difficult nights over many years. He did not make calls, though the phone sat on the desk where it always sat, and there were people he could have called. His lawyer, his father, the various men in various positions who existed to help him navigate complications. He sat in the leather chair and looked at the bookshelves and thought. He had met Lucia at the Garza wedding 14 months ago. He remembered this with more precision than the intervening months had any right to produce. There had been a rainstorm, unusual for that time of year, the sky suddenly deciding to be honest, and the outdoor ceremony had been hastily moved inside, and the gardens had been abandoned to the rain, and he had gone out anyway because he needed 10 minutes alone more than he needed dry clothes, and she had been there. She had been sheltering under the overhang near the east garden wall, her formal dress getting wet at the hem, because the overhang wasn't quite wide enough, and she had been looking at the rain with an expression he had never seen before on anyone's face in his presence. Completely relaxed. As though the rain were not an interruption but a gift, as though she had gotten exactly what she came for. He had said something. He couldn't now recall what exactly, something unremarkable, the kind of opening line generated by 2 people sharing an overhang, and she had looked at him and smiled, and the smile had been the warmest thing he had been in the presence of in a very long time. 3 days. They had spent 3 days in a temporary world made of hotel restaurants and long walks, and the particular intimacy of 2 people who have decided, consciously or not, that this will be temporary and have therefore given themselves permission to be more honest than they would ordinarily be. She had told him things about her childhood. He had told her, he realized now with some surprise, things about his that he told almost no one. She had been warm, not deferential. He had been with enough deferential people to recognize what she was not. But warm, which was different. Genuinely interested in things. Genuinely present. He had told himself afterward that she had wanted the ending as much as he had. That the mutual withdrawal had been mutual and therefore comfortable. He had been convenient to himself. His father had told him many times that he had built the empire on convenient interpretations of difficult truths. And this had not been intended as a compliment. His father had been right about that, if about nothing else. A baby. Matteo. He was nearly 40 and he had never permitted himself to want children, which was a different thing from never wanting them, though he had spent a long time in the confusion of the two. His life was not a life that children were supposed to enter. He had known this since he was a child himself, watching his father manage the particular arithmetic of power. What it cost to have it, what it required to keep it, what it meant for the people standing closest to it. He had understood early that love was leverage, not because he believed love was unreal, but because he had watched it be used as leverage too many times to maintain the luxury of thinking it was safe. He had built walls. Deliberate, well-engineered, effective walls. He had been, by any measure, successful at building them. And now there was a baby. And now there was the woman who had brought him. He kept returning to Rosa Medina. He remembered her, vaguely. 3 years of peripheral presence, one of the household staff, the one who managed the morning rounds and had a reputation among the other staff, as Thomas had mentioned once in passing, for efficiency and discretion. He had called her by name perhaps 4 times. He had not thought of her as a person, particularly, which was, he understood with a clarity that surprised him, a specific kind of failure. She had walked 6 miles, in the rain, with bare feet, after a confrontation that had left her bruised. She had stood at his gate at 2 a.m. and stared into the camera without flinching and said, "I keep my promises even to the dead." He sat in his study and thought about those words for a long time. Then he pressed the intercom. "Tums, run everything you can find on a woman named Rosa Medina, former employee. Personnel file will be in the system." He paused, "and find out who hit her tonight." The morning arrived in the way mornings arrive at large estates. Slowly by degrees, the light changing from gray to gold across the garden, the birds beginning their negotiations. The kitchen staff arriving at 6 to begin the preparations that would produce, by 8, a breakfast that nobody in the household except the kitchen staff considered a miracle of coordination. Rosa was already in the kitchen by 7. She had come down the back stairs, the staff stairs, the route she had memorized in 3 years of morning rounds, because sleeping felt like an indulgence she hadn't earned, and because she had heard Mateo beginning to stir at 6:30 and did not want him crying in a stranger's house. She had swaddled him with the competence of someone who had been doing this for 8 weeks, and had learned the particular geometry of a content infant, and she had come down meaning only to find the kitchen, and heat a bottle from the small supply she had carried in her backpack. The backpack, packed 3 days ago, which contained formula, 3 changes of infant clothing, a stuffed animal of Lucia's choosing, and a photograph. She had not expected to find Alejandro Vega at the kitchen island. He was dressed already, dark trousers, a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to the forearm, which told her he had not slept. He was reading something on a tablet, a cup of coffee at his right hand, and he had the quality of a man who has been awake long enough to arrive at a particular settled alertness, past the agitation of sleeplessness, and into the territory beyond it where the mind runs clean and cold. He looked up when she came in. They looked at each other for a moment that lasted longer than moments usually do. The former maid with the bruised eye and the borrowed clothes and the baby, the Mafia boss with the coffee and the sleepless night and the empire. And the scene was so ordinary and so impossible at the same time that Rosa felt something, almost like a laugh try to form somewhere in her chest. "Sit," he said. She sat at the kitchen island, across from him, Mateo still against her shoulder. He stood, moved to the small refrigerator beneath the counter, produced a prepared bottle. Formula, in a clean bottle. Clearly not something he had found, but something he had arranged. Rosa stared at it. "You anticipated," she started. "I had someone prepare it around 4. The baby would be hungry at approximately this time." He set the bottle on the island in front of her. "I did some reading. About newborn feeding schedules." She looked at him. He had read about infant feeding schedules at 4 in the morning. She picked up the bottle and began feeding Mateo, who accepted it with the single-minded enthusiasm of an 8-week-old with very clear priorities. Alejandro sat back down with his coffee and watched this. His expression was not easy to read. It was not cold. She had spent enough time in this kitchen to know the temperature of cold, which was what his face did in business conversations. A specific flatness that was its own kind of communication. This was something else. This was the expression of a man sitting very still because he is processing something enormous at a speed his face cannot quite keep up with. "Tell me about her," he said, quietly. Without preamble, Rosa looked at him. She had expected paternity tests, lawyers, legal arrangements. "What do you want? What are you asking for?" She had prepared for those conversations, had mapped the arguments, had thought through every version of the transactional morning, after of what she had done. She had not expected this. She told him about Lucia. She took her time. She told him about the laundry, about the way Lucia sang while she worked. Something self-conscious at first, half-mumbled and slightly off-key, that gradually became genuinely beautiful when she forgot to be embarrassed about it, when she got absorbed in the work and the music came out without supervision. She told him about Lucia's habit of naming things. The sewing machine was Rodrigo. The difficult client from Polanco was the ambassador never to his face. The spider that appeared annually in the upper corner of the laundry was welcomed each year as old friend. She told him about the apartment on Cal Mimosa, the leaky window in the kitchen that Lucia had sealed with caulk and prayer, the curtains sewn from fabric she'd found at a flea market, the small shelf of board books arranged alphabetically. She told him how Lucia had found that apartment 3 months into her pregnancy, how she had walked through the door and said, with the particular finality of someone who has been looking for something for a long time, "This one." She told him how Lucia had repainted the walls of the second room herself, a pale yellow that she had deliberated over for 2 weeks, standing in the paint aisle of the hardware store holding sample chips up to the light. She told him about the 8 weeks before Lucia died, the exhaustion that was also joy, the specific mixture of new motherhood, the way Lucia would look at Mateo with an expression of profound bewilderment and tenderness, as though she still couldn't quite believe she had made something so complete. The way she had held him, always, with both hands, with the specific grip of someone who understands that the most important things in life require both hands and deserve no less. She told him about the Tuesday morning. She did not spare herself in the telling. She told him about the unanswered calls, and the feeling that arrived in her chest at the second one, the feeling that had a specific shape and weight, and that she had tried to ignore until the third. She told him about walking up the 3 flights of Call Mimosa 8, and finding the door unlocked, and what she had found inside. She told him about the hours she had spent, about what was said in it, about the quality of Lucia's voice toward the end, not afraid, which had surprised Rosa, but settled, in the specific way of someone who has decided what matters, and has managed to do it before the time ran out. She told him about the promise. When she finished, the kitchen was very quiet. The morning light had settled into full gold. Mateo had finished his bottle and fallen back into the doze of satisfied infants, his weight a warm specific pressure against Rosa's chest. Alejandro was looking at the counter. "She never contacted me," he said. It was not an accusation. It was a statement being examined, turned over, checked for what it revealed. "No. She should have," he said. "I would have." He stopped. The unfinished sentence sat between them, occupying the space of everything it was claiming and everything it might not have been true. "She didn't know that," Rosa said, not unkindly. Simply. "She knew your name. She knew what your name meant to people who knew it. She was frightened. She was proud. She was very good at managing alone, and she had learned to trust that competence more than she trusted the unknown." She paused. She wasn't wrong to be uncertain. She was just wrong about the outcome. "You don't know what the outcome would have been," Alejandro said, quietly. Not defensively. "No," Rosa agreed, "but I know what this one is." He looked at her then, the full weight of his attention, which was, she had remembered and learned in the past hour, a significant thing. The ability to look at someone as though looking were a complete act in itself, thorough and unhurried. "You're here because you made a promise," he said. "Yes. And now that you've kept it." Rosa looked down at Mateo. His eyes were closed, his breathing slow and warm. She thought about the question. Really thought about it, not the prepared answer but the honest one. "I don't know yet," she said. "I know I'll want to know he's safe. I know I won't be able to go somewhere else and simply assume." She paused. "I know that Lucia trusted me with the most important thing she had. That doesn't end with delivery." Something in Alejandro's face shifted, a slight, almost imperceptible movement, the kind that a person who is not watching closely would miss. "Stay," he said. It was not a full sentence. It was the first word of one he hadn't finished working out yet. Rosa waited. "For now," he said. "While arrangements are made, while things are confirmed." He was careful with words as a rule, and the carefulness here was of a different kind, not precision so much as honesty, which sometimes requires more care than precision. "I need to have certain things confirmed. You understand, a paternity test." "Rosas?" "I expected that." She looked at him steadily. Lucia would have expected it too. She was practical. A brief pause. "You can stay in the room you had last night. There will be a proper arrangement for Mateo. I'll have Elena." He stopped. "Elena is someone I'll bring in. She's..." He seemed briefly at a loss, which was a quality she had never seen in Alejandro Vega and which struck her as unexpectedly humanizing. "A caretaker." Rose offered. "A good one. I trust her." A pause. "She has experience." Rosa said. "I'll be here until I'm certain Mateo is..." "Until I'm certain?" "Until you're certain," he repeated. "I keep my promises," Rosa said, "and I extend them when they require it." He looked at her for one more moment, that full weight look, the one that did not waste itself on surfaces, and then he nodded, picked up his coffee, returned to the tablet. The conversation was, evidently, concluded. Rosa stood, shifted Mateo to a better position against her shoulder, and began to walk back toward the stairs. "Rosa," she stopped, "have the kitchen staff bring you breakfast. Doda Petra is in at 8. He paused. "She'll be glad to see you. She asked about you when you left." Rosa did not let herself react visibly to this information, to the fact that he knew Doda Petra had asked about her, that this had been filed somewhere in the inventory of things he kept track of. "Thank you," she said. She went upstairs. The 2 weeks became 3. The 3 became 5. These are the weeks that do not announce themselves as significant. While they are happening, they arrive with the ordinary vocabulary of daily life. Mornings and meals and the small negotiations of shared space. And it is only afterward, looking back, that you understand their weight. Rosa stayed, as she had said she would, and the staying arranged itself around her until it stopped feeling temporary. Elena arrived on the third day, a formidably competent woman of 60, one with gray, streaked braids pinned at the back of her head, and the manner of someone who has raised 4 children of her own and considers everything produced by this experience to be useful data. She greeted Mateo with the brisk, genuine warmth of a professional who loves her work, installed herself in the nursery with the efficiency of a general taking a position, and within 24 hours had produced a feeding and sleeping schedule that she presented to Rosa and Alejandro simultaneously, with annotations. Alejandro looked at the schedule for a long moment. "This seems thorough," he said. "It is thorough," Elena said with the confidence of someone who does not experience uncertainty about their area of expertise. "Would you like to discuss it?" "No," Alejandro said. "Thank you, Elena." Elena nodded, satisfied, and returned to the nursery. Rosa, who had been watching this exchange, caught Alejandro's eye for a fraction of a second. Something passed between them, not quite amusement, but the shared recognition that something faintly ridiculous had occurred, which is a kind of intimacy. He looked away first. The DNA results arrived on a Tuesday, 12 days after Rosa had come through the gate. Alejandro read them alone in his study and did not emerge for 2 hours. Rosa was in the garden with Mateo when she heard the study door open, and she looked up at the window that overlooked the garden, the study window, and saw him standing there for a moment, looking out, not at her, just out, at the garden and the sky and whatever interior geography he was navigating. He did not look devastated. He did not look relieved exactly. He looked like a man who has just had a door open that he had not known was there, and is standing in the frame, deciding whether to go through. He looked up and saw her looking. For a moment, they simply looked at each other through the glass. She in the garden with the baby, he in the study with the confirmation. Something passed between them that neither of them could have named at the time, but that they would both later identify as the moment. He came down to the garden 20 minutes later. He sat on the bench across from where Rosa was standing with Mateo and he said, "The results confirm it." He said it simply, without embellishment, in the voice he used for facts. Rosa nodded. "I want to discuss arrangements," he said. "Long-term arrangements, legal arrangements. I have a lawyer who..." "Letter," Rosa said. He looked at her. She was holding Mateo toward him, not handing him over. Not yet, but tilting him slightly enough to offer. Alejandro looked at the baby. He looked at him for a long time, long enough that Rosa almost withdrew the offer. Then, with the careful deliberateness of a man who has made many decisions but not quite this one, he reached out and took his son. He held him with both hands, slightly too far from his body, the way a person holds something they are frightened of dropping. Mateo opened his eyes. He looked at Alejandro with the unfocused, assessing gaze of a 10-week-old. The ancient, democratic regard of infants, who have not yet learned to be impressed by power or wealth or reputation and evaluate everything by the same simple standard: is this safe? Is this warm? Is this mine? Something on Alejandro's face undid itself, not completely. He was not a man who undid completely, and Rosa understood by now that this was not entirely a failing, that some of the control was genuine and some of it was necessary, and not all walls are built out of fear. But something undid itself, quietly, in the privacy of a garden on a Tuesday afternoon, while a 10-week-old infant studied his father's face. "Arrangements can wait," Alejandro said. His voice was slightly different, the quality of control still present but around something softer. "Yes," Rosa said. They sat in the garden together until Mateo fell asleep. He spent time with the baby, more time than Rosa had expected. She had anticipated hands-off oversight, the engagement of a wealthy man acknowledging obligation from a careful distance, providing resources and staff while the actual work of proximity was managed by others. She had anticipated exactly this: Elena in the nursery, Alejandro in the study, the river of care flowing through professionals in between. She had not anticipated finding him at 3 in the morning in the nursery chair. She had woken to use the bathroom, passed the nursery door on the way back, and seen the thin line of light under it. She had pushed the door open, quietly, carefully, the practiced quiet of someone who has learned the enormous difference between a sleeping baby and a waking one. Alejandro was in the chair in the corner. Mateo was asleep against his chest, face turned toward his father's heartbeat, fingers curled against the white shirt. The lamp on the low table was on, but Alejandro was not reading. He was simply awake and still, in the specific way of someone processing something larger than sleep can hold. Rosa had turned to go, not wanting to intrude. He had heard her. He had very good hearing, which was part of how he had survived the world he moved in, and turned his head. "He makes a sound when he sleeps," Alejandro said quietly, not moving, not raising his voice, like he's arguing with something. Rosa leaned against the doorframe. Lucia said he was opinionated. At 8 weeks. A pause. She was right, Rosa smiled. She had not smiled very much in the weeks since Lucia died. Grief had settled into her like a long-term tenant claiming corners she hadn't known were empty, and smiling felt, sometimes, like a small betrayal of the person she was grieving. But the smile was there, and she let it be there, in the dark nursery doorway. "He'll need a name for you soon," Rosa said. Alejandro looked at his son. He has a name. Something to call you. When he's old enough to call anyone anything. A long pause. Yes, Alejandro said, as though he had just understood something he had been thinking around without approaching. Go to sleep, Rosa said. I have him. He shook his head slightly, a small definitive movement that she read correctly as not yet. She went back to her room. She lay in the dark and thought about the man in the chair, holding his son with the particular grip of someone who has realized, too late to prepare for it, that he is not willing to let go. She thought, I am going to make this very complicated for myself. She thought, I am already here. Duda Petra found Rosa in the kitchen on the 4th morning and hugged her with the full-bodied enthusiasm of a woman who expresses most of her emotions through physical contact. You left without saying goodbye, Duda Petra said into Rosa's shoulder, still hugging. 18 months and you left without a single goodbye. I know, Rosa said. I'm sorry. You are forgiven, Duda Petra said. She released Rosa and held her at arm's length, and examined her with the frank assessment of someone who has known her for 3 years, and can read the inventory of what those 3 years had added and subtracted. Look tired. He keeps making himself small enough to reach. The door opened, Tom's. Then, behind him, in the particular rapid stillness of a man who has been moving very fast and is now managing himself back into control, Alejandro, he looked at her. He looked at Mateo. Are you hurt? He asked. His voice was controlled. Whatever was underneath the control was audible in the quality of the control itself, the specific weight of effort it was taking. No, Rosa said. Mateo. He's fine. He slept through the approach. He woke up in the corridor, but he's... She looked at the baby in her arms. He's fine. Something in Alejandro's chest visibly released. Not a dramatic release. He was not a dramatic man. But she saw it, the small lowering of attention that had been held in the set of his shoulders. He crossed the room. He crouched down to her level. On the floor again, this man always finding his way to floors when it mattered, and he looked at her from a distance of 2 feet. I'm sorry, he said. This was my failure. The timing. You couldn't have. I should have anticipated the window. I knew there were parties who were. He stopped. Started again. With the particular honesty of a man who holds himself to standards that most people would consider unreasonable. I was addressing the situation and I was not addressing it fast enough. Is it handled now? It will be by morning. Then it's handled, Rosa said. She looked at him steadily. I got us here. Mateo is fine. The system worked. That is the outcome. He was looking at her with an expression she was becoming better at reading. The layers of it. The controlled exterior, and beneath it the thing the control was containing, and beneath that the thing that neither of them had named yet. The system worked because you knew it, he said. Because you listened during the briefing and remembered it under pressure and moved with. He paused. I was terrified, Rosa said. Yes, he said, and you were composed. Both things are true. She looked at him. She thought I am not being careful. She thought I do not care. Help me up, she said. He held out his hand. She took it. Marco Ibarra. The name arrived in the estate's intelligence 2 days after the garden incident, with the additional context that made Fuentes' visit 3 weeks earlier legible as what it had actually been, not a courtesy, but an audit. Fuentes had come to assess what response a warning would produce. The response had been insufficient to dissuade the parties he represented. Marco Ibarra, who had specific interests in the power vacuum that the existence of an acknowledged Vega hair complicated, had decided to accelerate. Alejandro moved against him with the systematic patience of a chess player who has been thinking several moves ahead for weeks. Rosa did not know the details. She knew outcomes. She knew that Tom's made 3 visits to the North property in 2 days, and each time returned with the slightly settled expression of a man crossing items off a list. She knew that Alejandro held 4 separate meetings in the study, each with different men, each brief and private. She knew that on the 3rd evening, he came to the garden where she was sitting with Mateo in the last of the afternoon light, and sat on the bench across from her, and his shoulders had a quality she had learned to read as resolution. It's done, he said. Ibarra will not be a concern. Fuentes has been persuaded to reassess his calculations. A pause. The others who were considering related positions have been made aware of the new arithmetic. The new arithmetic, Rosa said. That challenging this family is now significantly more costly than any potential benefit. He looked at Mateo. The specific way he looked at Mateo, which Rosa had been watching develop over 5 weeks into something that had no defense in it, no management, just the direct, unguarded fact of a father looking at his child. He is not leverage. He is the reason the leverage doesn't work. Will it hold? It will hold. He said it with a certainty that was not arrogance. She had learned the difference between those 2 things in him over 5 weeks, the specific texture of certainty versus bravado, and this was certainty. I am very good at making things hold, she believed him. Thank you, she said. He looked at her. For what? For fixing it. She paused. For the bottle at 4 in the morning. For Thomas telling me about Philippe Garza. For sitting on floors. She stopped herself before she listed everything, which would have taken a long time. He was quiet for a moment. I should have asked you properly, he said, what your situation is, after all of this, where you would go, whether you have. He seemed briefly to navigate between several different versions of the question and settle on the most direct one. You left here 18 months ago. Why? Rosa was quiet for a moment. Because I could see what was going to happen to me if I stayed, she said. Not to me. Nothing would have happened to me. I mean what I was going to feel. If I stayed and kept seeing. She stopped. Started again, with the same directness he had used. I am not good at not feeling things. I tried to be for a long time, and I found it exhausting and also unsuccessful. So I left. He was watching her with the full weight attention. What were you going to feel? He asked. She met his eyes. You know what I was going to feel.
A pause, yes,
he said. I think I do. The garden was very quiet. I haven't managed it very well from here either, Rosa said. As a piece of information. No, he said. Neither have I. The afternoon light was going golden, the specific gold of late day in a garden that has been cared for by people who love it. And the birds were doing what birds do at this hour. And Mateo was looking at the leaves of the big tree with the focused philosophical interest of someone recently acquainted with the existence of leaves. And neither of them said anything else for a while. They did not need to. She should have left. This was the thought that arrived every morning for the next 2 weeks with the regularity of whether she should leave. The crisis was resolved. Mateo was safe. Elena was excellent. Alejandro had the resources of a small nation and the will to deploy them for his son's protection. Rosa had fulfilled her promise, and then she had extended it, and the extension had been fulfilled too. And there was no legitimate remaining reason for her to be here except the one she had admitted in the garden. The one she had admitted in the garden. She stayed, and the staying stopped feeling temporary and started feeling like a life. She had a room that had, in small ways, become hers. A book on the nightstand, a specific mug in the kitchen rotation, the knowledge of where Dodo Petra kept the good tea. She had a rhythm with Mateo that was its own thing. The mornings she had him before Elena arrived, the afternoon garden hours, the way he looked at her when she came into a room, the particular reaching gesture he had developed at 10 weeks that was aimed at her face specifically. She had the morning kitchen hour with Alejandro. This had become its own organism. Neither of them had decided it had simply established itself, the way living things establish themselves in available space. Most mornings, between 6 and 7, before the household woke fully, they existed in the same kitchen. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they didn't. Both were acceptable. Both were, Rosa had begun to understand, a form of the same thing. The choice to be present, to be nearby, to not maintain the distance that both of them were capable of maintaining. It was the most dangerous hour of her day. It was the hour she guarded least. On the morning of the 49th day, she came downstairs at 6 and found him already there, not with the tablet and the coffee of the first morning, but simply sitting at the island with his hands around his mug, not reading, not working, just there. He looked up when she came in. Sit, he said. She sat. He poured her coffee without being asked. This had stopped being remarkable some weeks ago, the way the specific intimate shorthand of shared mornings stops being remarkable and starts being the currency of ordinary days. He put the phone down. This was unusual. I have a question, he said. It's personal. Ask. Why are you still here? Rosa looked at him. Mateo is safe, he said, not harshly, carefully. The immediate threats have been resolved. Elena is more than capable. You fulfilled the promise to Lucia. You have, as far as I can tell, extended that promise well beyond what was required. He held her gaze steadily. So why are you still here? Rosa looked at the mug between her hands. The particular quality of the question. The directness of it. The way it had clearly been arrived at after considerable interior deliberation. Deserved the same quality of answer. Because I don't want to leave, she said. He said nothing, waited. I know that's not a complete answer, Rosa said. I know the situation is. I know what the situation is. I worked in your house for 3 years. You were my employer. You were, to me, the way weather is to someone living outside. Something that shaped conditions but wasn't personal. Wasn't something I was supposed to interpret or feel about in any particular way. She paused. I didn't plan for the interpretation that happened. I left before I had to deal with it. And then I came back under circumstances that were nothing to do with you, and something happened that I also did not plan, and I am trying. Rosa. She stopped. He had said her name in a way that was different from all the previous times. Not the utility of an employer. Not the precision of someone managing a conversation. The way a person says a word they have been practicing saying without managing. For weeks, she thought, looking at his face. For weeks he had been working up to this. I've been trying to find a way to ask you to stay, he said. Not under the current terms. Properly ask. He paused. I'm not good at this. I am aware that I am not good at this. I am very good at a number of things that do not include this. I know, Rosa said. My life is complicated. I know what your life is. You know some of it. Tell me the rest. He looked at the counter for a moment, then at her. My father built this organization on the principle that loyalty was the only currency that couldn't be devalued, he said. He was right about that one thing and wrong about most of the others. He built walls between himself and everyone he loved, because he believed that love was vulnerability and vulnerability was fatal in his world. He died surrounded by loyal men and he was the most alone person I have ever seen. A pause. I have been building the same walls, Rosa said. Have been? He agreed. Past tense. I'm noticing the past tense. She said nothing, waited for him. I look at Mateo, he said. I think about what I want him to inherit, not the organization. That's a conversation for many years from now and he can make his own choices about it. But what I want him to inherit from me, the man. He paused. I want him to know how to love someone properly. I want him to know that the walls are a choice, not a requirement. He stopped. I want him to see his father not be his grandfather. Rosa's chest felt too full. You already aren't, she said quietly. You sit on floors, Alejandra, you make yourself small enough to reach. That's not what walls do. Something moved in his face. I want you to stay, he said. The simplest version. I want you here. Not because of Mateo, though that is also true and I will not pretend otherwise. Because this house is better when you're in it. Because I am. He looked directly at her. Because I am better when you're in it. The morning light came through the kitchen window in the way it always did. You're still terrible at this, Rosa said. Something happened at the corner of his mouth, the almost smile which she had catalogued and was secretly expert in. Yes, he said. Also that was still not particularly romantic. I know. She looked at him across the island. This man, this complicated, carefully built, floor-sitting, bottle-warming, empire-running, love-learning man, and she thought about all the distance between where they had started and where they were sitting. I'll stay, she said. She stayed. The staying that followed was different from the staying that had preceded it. Not in the daily texture, which remained mornings and meals and Mateo's evolving opinions about everything, but in some interior quality, some shift in the weather of the house that both of them felt, and neither immediately knew how to describe. Something had been said. Something had been accepted. The days were the same and different. Aura Catalina arrived on a Thursday. She was Alejandro's aunt, his father's younger sister, the only member of his family who had, as far as Rosa could determine from 5 weeks of careful observation, any genuine claim to his respect. She was 60, 3 years old and moved through rooms like a weather system with excellent shoes, and she had opinions about everything and expressed them with the surgical precision of someone who has spent 60 years being right most of the time and considers softening a form of dishonesty. She arrived without warning, swept through the front entrance past a slightly nonplussed Tom's, found Alejandro in the study, and said, Rosa was later told, "Where is the baby?" Not a question. She held Mateo for 20 minutes. She sat in the garden chair and held the infant with the competence of a woman who has held many infants and considers this one particular. And she did not look at him with the saccharine softening that babies often produce in adults, but rather with the frank, assessing regard of someone taking something seriously. Then she asked to see Rosa. Rosa came to the garden expecting. She was not sure what she expected. Assessment, certainly. Perhaps the interrogation that Tom's loyalty audit had been a more formal version of. Perhaps the particular scrutiny of a woman who loves someone and is examining the person they have chosen. Aura Catalina looked at her for approximately 45 seconds with the unsettling directness of someone who reads people for sport. Then she turned to Alejandro and said, "For once in your life you have done something intelligent. Don't ruin it." She left the following morning. After she had gone, Rosa found Alejandro in the kitchen. "She likes you," he said. In case the phrasing was ambiguous. "I understood the phrasing," Rosa said. "Good, she's terrifying." "Yes." The almost smile. She would take that as a compliment. Mateo laughed for the first time on a Tuesday, 11 weeks old. Alejandro had been lying on the play mat with him, a position Rosa had observed him arrive at through a gradual, apparently unconscious process of getting lower and lower, from chair to floor to play mat, holding a set of plastic stacking rings above the baby's face and doing something with his expression that she could not precisely describe from the doorway, and that Mateo apparently found objectively hilarious. The laugh lasted approximately 4 seconds. It was a whole, complete sound, gummy, surprised, entirely committed. The laugh of someone who has just discovered that they can make this sound, and is immediately deploying it at full volume. Alejandro stopped moving. All of him stopped. The hand with the rings, the slight movement he had been making with his face, every managed and unmanaged part of him, stopped. He looked at his son. Rosa, in the doorway, did not breathe. She watched Alejandro Vega, who had built an empire on controlled distance, who had inherited walls and refined them and lived behind them with the efficiency of someone who has made his peace with the architecture of his life. She watched him receive his son's first laugh with an expression that she had never seen on any face before, and would not have been able to describe adequately if someone had asked her to. Open, undisguised, struck completely through, loving with a totality that had no management in it at all. She watched him know it. She watched him understand, in real time. What was happening to him? Watched the recognition arrive in his face, the startled clarity of a man who has understood that the thing he spent his whole life preventing has happened anyway, and the feeling is not what the prevention had implied it would be. It was not loss. It was not vulnerability. It was the opposite of what the walls had been built to protect against. He looked up and saw her in the doorway. She did not try to hide what was on her face. She had stopped trying to hide things from him some weeks ago, and this particular moment, this specific grace, she would not have hidden from him for anything. Neither did he. On the morning of the 57th day, before the rest of the household woke, Rosa brought Matteo to the kitchen to find Alejandro already there. This was not unusual. What was unusual was that he was standing at the counter with the baby monitor in one hand and a piece of paper in the other, and his expression had a quality she had not seen before, something uncertain, slightly exposed, like a door that has been opened before the person behind it has decided they're ready. "What is that?" she asked. He held it out. She took it. It was a drawbelines, clearly not his natural medium, depicting a house, a garden, 3 figures, a tall one, a medium one, and a very small one. Underneath it, in Matteo's name, because Alejandro had started signing the baby's imagined correspondence as a kind of private joke, it said, "This is where I want to stay." Rosa looked at it for a long time. "He dictated," Alejandro said. The dryness that was his version of tenderness. "He has very good handwriting for 11 weeks. Rosa's advanced. She looked up at him. "I didn't know how to say the next thing," he said. "So I drew it. Badly." "Yes." Rosa agreed. "But I understood it." She put the paper on the counter and looked at him. This man, this careful, armored, floor-sitting, badly drawing man who was trying, with everything he had, to come down from the height of himself into the level of something real. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. He exhaled. The same small, controlled, audible release she had heard once before, and this time she was close enough to see it in his chest, the giving way of something held. "I know," he said. "I know that. I wanted to." He paused. "I wanted to ask formally, properly, not a household arrangement, not because of Matteo, though I cannot separate." He stopped, started again. "I want you to be here because you chose to be here, because I chose to ask you to be here, because it's a..." "Yes," Rosa said. "Yes," she said again. "Whatever the question is, in whatever form you get to it, yes." Something happened on his face that was not the almost smile. It was the actual smile which she had not seen before in its complete form, and it was... She would think about this later, in the dark, in the bed that had been hers for almost 2 months. It was quite extraordinary. Not large, not dramatic, but whole and real, and arrived at from such a distance that its presence was its own kind of evidence. He crossed the kitchen. He took her face in his hands. Those careful hands, which she had catalogued without meaning to for weeks, which she had watched with Matteo and understood to be capable of more gentleness than their owner's reputation suggested. And he held her face and looked at her from a distance of inches. "I am going to be better at this," he said. "You're already better," she said. He kissed her. It was not, after all of it, a dramatic kiss. It was unhurried and careful and complete, the kind of kiss that contains everything that has been not said for months. And when it ended they remained close, his hands still on her face, her hands at his chest. The morning light doing what it did. From the monitor on the counter, the sound of Matteo beginning to wake a series of small, preliminary sounds, pre-complaint. The warming up of a person preparing to have opinions about the morning. They both heard it. They both turned, slightly, toward the monitor. The simultaneous, automatic turning of people who have been listening for that specific sound for long enough that it has become part of how they move through the world. Alejandro looked at the monitor, then at Rosa. "I'll get him," he said. "I know," Rosa said. "I know you will." She had been there for 5 months and 3 days when he proposed, not on one knee. She had been there long enough to know him well enough to know that theatrical gestures were not his register, and she would not have wanted them. It was evening, and Matteo was asleep, and they were in the garden in the warm air of a season that was late enough to be generous. He had been working up to something for 4 days. She had noticed it the way she had learned to notice things about him, in small accumulations of evidence, a particular quality of pause before he spoke, the way he held something internally before releasing it. "I've never done this," he said. "In case the quality of execution reflects poorly, I know," Rosa said. "I'm going to say it badly. You say most important things badly and then you spend weeks proving them through action," Rosa said. "I have accepted this as your methodology." "Marry me," he said. Quiet, direct, carrying under the control and precision a weight that was the opposite of controlled. Something open and enormous and arrived at from a very long way. Rosa looked at him. She thought about a rain-soaked street and a gate and a camera. She thought about an entrance hall at 2 in the morning, and the way he had come down the stairs, and the thing she had seen move behind his eyes when he saw the baby. She thought about floors, all the ways he had made himself small enough to meet her. She thought about Lucia, who had been warm, who had trusted Rosa with the most important thing she had, and about the promise made in the last hour. She thought, look where keeping it brought me. Yes, she said. He exhaled, the small, controlled, completely real release, and reached out and took her hand. They sat in the garden in the evening, and the city burned with lights in the distance, and somewhere in the house a small person slept with his fists curled and his opinions temporarily suspended. I want to be different, he said, from what I've been. For him? For you? You are different, Rosa said. You've been different. I watched it happen. You watched it. Every day. She turned her hand in his so they were palm to palm. You think it's a decision you're arriving at. I watched it as a series of small choices. Every morning, every floor, every bottle, every time you could have maintained the distance and you came down instead. She paused. That's not arriving at something. That's already being it. He was quiet for a long time. She would have liked you, Rosa said. He looked at her. Lucia. Yes. She paused. She would have said something devastating and accurate about you within the first 5 minutes. She was like that. She saw people very quickly. And then she would have told me privately that she approved. A pause. She would have approved. I know she would have. He held her gaze. I would like to have known her, he said. I know, Rosa said. I know you would. They sat together in the evening quiet, holding that, the fact of Lucia, who was not here and whose presence was felt in everything, whose greatest act of love had been to send her child toward people she had never met, toward a gate she had never stood outside, on the faith that the world contained people who would keep their word. The evening before their wedding, small, private, garden and immediate family only, which meant see Ora Catalina and Rosa's mother and 2 cousins and Dota Pitcher and Elena, and Tom's as best man, which made Alejandro's face do the almost smile when it was suggested and the full smile when Tom's, without any visible change in expression, accepted. Rosa went to Mateo's room. He was 5 months old. He was, as Elena regularly and without exaggeration described him, extraordinarily opinionated. He had opinions about his mobile, opinions about the specific angle at which he was held, opinions about the outdoor sounds that came through his window, strong ongoing opinions about the birds in the garden, which he tracked with the focused intensity of someone who considers birds to be a personal matter requiring his direct supervision. He was awake. She picked him up and carried him to the chair by the window, and held him in the lamplight and told him about his mother. She told him the whole story, from the beginning, the laundry and the coffee and the Saturday afternoons and Carlos the difficult coffee maker. She told him about the apartment on Cal Mimosa and the pale yellow walls and the board books arranged alphabetically and the curtains sewn from flea market fabric. She told him about the way Lucia loved him before he was born, and while he was being born and in every hour of the 8 weeks she had. She told him about the promise. She sent you somewhere good, Rosa said. I want you to know that. She sent you to your father, he is difficult and he is learning and he is extraordinary, and he sits on floors for you. He will always sit on floors for you. She paused. She sent you to me, which I think she planned, because she knew me well enough to know that I would not just deliver you and leave. She knew I would stay. A pause. She knew us both very well. Mateo was looking at her face. He reached up, with the focused purposefulness he brought to everything, and grabbed her nose. Rosa laughed. A real laugh, the kind that arrives without warning from somewhere genuine. She knew you too, Rosa said. She always said you were opinionated. He held her nose and regarded her with the ancient democratic gaze of an infant who has assessed the situation and found it satisfactory. We're going to be okay, Rosa told him. We're going to be okay. 3 weeks after the wedding, Alejandro called Tom's into the study. I need you to arrange something, he said. Thomas waited. There is a small cemetery in Colonia San Rafael, Section 7. A woman named Lucia Reyes is buried there. I want her grave maintained permanently. Fresh flowers, always the stone kept clean. Twice a month, not just on special occasions, because she was not a special occasion. She was someone's every day. He paused. On the anniversary of her death, I want the best arrangement the city produces. Money is not the constraint. Thomas wrote this down. I want a bench placed nearby. Alejandro continued. Wood and iron. Well made. Something that will last 20 years, not something decorative. A bench that people can actually sit on. He paused, and a plaque, small, simple. He had worked on the wording. It should say she kept her promises. Thomas looked at him. That's all, Alejandro said. Thomas nodded. He turned back. She walked. 6 miles, Alejandro said, in the rain. Because someone she loved asked her to. Because she had given her word. A pause. That deserves to be remembered. Yes, Tom said. He went to arrange it. On the morning of the 193rd day. 6 months and 13 days since the gate opened in the rain at 2 in the morning. Rosa came downstairs at 6 and found Alejandro in the kitchen with Mateo on his hip. This was not unusual. This was, in fact, the particular ordinary miracle of their mornings. Alejandro, who did not sleep past 5:30 anymore, who had found in the early hours a quality of quiet he had not previously known to want, who was in the kitchen most mornings before Rosa. who had Mateo with him because Mateo had begun to have very strong opinions about who collected him from the crib in the morning, and had registered these opinions with sufficient volume and specificity that the household had adjusted accordingly. She stood in the doorway. Father and son were conducting what appeared to be a bilateral conversation about the coffee maker. Mateo had opinions about the coffee maker. He had opinions about everything, which was, as Alejandro had once said, looking at him with the expression he only used with Mateo, something he gets from his mother. And Rosa had understood then, as she had understood on that first morning, that both of his mothers were in that sentence. She stood in the doorway and watched the man she had married explain the functionality of the coffee maker to a 5-month-old with the patient, serious honesty of someone who considers it important to be honest with children even about things they cannot yet understand. She watched Mateo reach up and grab her husband's collar with both fists and pull, with the focused purposefulness of someone who considers physical possession a legitimate conversational contribution. She watched Alejandro let himself be pulled and let the smile arrive. The real one, which she had learned by now was rare and was real, and which transformed his face in the specific way of things arriving from a long distance. She let herself cry. Quietly, in the doorway, in the morning light, she let the tears she had been managing for 6 months. The grief, the exhaustion, the relief, the love, all the things she had put in the box marked later and had been opening slowly, one at a time, as she could manage them, she let some of them come. She cried for Lucia, who had been warm and funny and had named coffee makers and arranged board books alphabetically, and had loved her son with every cell of an abbreviated life. She cried for the woman she had been on the cobblestones outside the gate, barefoot and bruised and completely out of options, except the one that had worked. She cried because the gate had opened. She cried because it had been worth it. All of it. Every mile and every drop of rain and everything that had been hard. And she cried because Lucia had known this, had sent her here knowing it, had trusted Rosa to find what was behind the gate. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. She stepped into the kitchen. Alejandro looked up, saw her face, said nothing, but his eyes asked everything. She said, "I'm fine. I'm happy." He looked at her for a moment with the full, weight attention. "Coffee," he said. "Yes," she said. He handed her the mug he had already prepared. Mateo turned his head at the sound of her voice and produced, with the enormous effort and absolute commitment of a 5-month-old, his best attempt at the smile that would, in a few more weeks, become effortless. Rosa felt her face do what it always did, the helpless, whole body opening of someone who has been claimed completely. She took him from Alejandro's arms, and Alejandro let him go with the ease of someone who has learned the difference between holding and holding on, who has understood that the things worth keeping are the things you can release and trust to return. She held Mateo on her hip and he grabbed her nose and regarded her with the ancient assessing gaze, and she said, quietly, just for him, what she said to him every morning. "She would be so proud of you." He kept her nose and blinked. "Both of us," Rosa said. "She would be so proud of both of us." She looked up. Alejandro was watching them. In his face, which she had spent 6 months learning to read, was everything. Grief for what Lucia had not had, gratitude for what she had sent them, love for his son, love for this woman in his kitchen. The slow and ongoing work of a man dismantling the architecture of isolation stone by careful stone, and discovering that what's on the other side is not the vulnerability he had been protecting against. It is the thing that makes the protection worth doing. It is the reason for all of it. Rosa looked at him. He looked at her. Mateo, between them, had opinions about the window. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning," he said. The light came in. The city outside continued its enormous daily business. Somewhere in Section 7 of a small cemetery in Colonia San Rafael, fresh flowers had arrived on a grave, and a bench had been placed in the shade of a nearby tree, and on the bench, a small plaque caught the morning light. She kept her promises. And on a street 6 miles from a gate that had opened in the rain, on a night when a woman with bare feet, and a bruised face and an infant in her arms had stood in front of a camera and refused to look away, something had begun that none of them had intended and all of them had needed. The specific, improbable, ordinary miracle of people who find each other across the distance of everything that separates them and discover, on the other side, that the crossing was the point. Some promises are made in the last minutes of a life. Some promises walk 6 miles to be kept. Some promises open gates that have been closed for a very long time, and behind those gates, past the walls and the controlled distances, and the careful management of a man who learned too early that love was leverage, there is sometimes a kitchen, and morning light, and a baby with opinions about everything, and a beginning that looks, from the inside, exactly like home. The Alejandro had been 12 years old the first time he understood what his father was, not what the men who came to the house were. He had understood that much earlier, in the way children understand things that the adults around them pretend are invisible, which is to say completely and without the vocabulary to articulate it. He had understood that his father's men were not businessmen in the conventional sense, That the conversations in the study had a quality different from the conversations his friends of fathers had in their studies. That the men who came at unusual hours had a quality of attentiveness. That was not the attentiveness of colleagues, but the attentiveness of people who were calculating things. He had understood all of this by the time he was 8. What he understood at 12 was different. What he understood at 12 was that his father's way of loving was also his father's way of controlling. That the two things were, in the elder Vega's architecture, indistinguishable. He had seen it in the way his father spoke to his mother, with the specific warmth of a man who considers his family a possession he values, which is a kind of love, but not the kind that leaves the other person free. He had watched his mother leave that year, and he had watched his father receive it, not with grief, which would have been human, but with the tight, contained fury of a man who has had something taken that he considered his. He had not gone after her. He had not called. He had treated her leaving the way he treated most losses, as a problem of insufficient control, which he had subsequently solved by controlling more things more completely. Alejandro had filed this away. He had filed it under "Do not become this." And then, because he was his father's son in more ways than he had wanted to acknowledge, he had built his own version of the same architecture, more refined, more controlled, achieving the same isolation through slightly different means. He was thinking about this on the morning of the 11th day, sitting in the study with the personnel file Rosa had refused to discuss. He had pulled it himself, not because he doubted Tom's assessment, but because he needed to understand who had walked through his gate. And reading the 3 years of service evaluations, the records, the small accumulated evidence of a person, efficiency, discretion, reliability, positive evaluations from Dodo Pitra, who evaluated no one with positive generosity, a notation from the previous head of household management, excellent judgment in ambiguous situations. He thought about the camera, the stillness, the direct eyes. He thought about "I keep my promises, even to the dead." He put the file down. He thought about the walls he had built. He thought about his father's walls. He thought about the way walls, when you have lived inside them long enough, stop feeling like a choice and start feeling like the shape of the world. He was still thinking about this when Rosa appeared in the kitchen doorway the following morning, and he said, without entirely meaning to, the word that was the beginning of something sit. And Dodo Petra had a theory about houses. She had developed it over 22 years of managing households. First the Vega estate, before that 2 other houses of comparable size and comparable complications. And the theory was this: a house knows what it is housing. The quality of the air changes, the sounds change, not dramatically, not in ways that could be measured by instruments, but in ways that could be felt by people who have spent their professional lives paying attention to such things. The Vega estate had been, for as long as she had worked in it, a quiet house, not peaceful quiet. The distinction was important. Peaceful quiet was the quiet of things at rest. This was managed quiet, the quiet of things being held still by intention, the particular silence of a house where the person at its center has decided, consciously or not, that silence is safer than sound. She had learned to work within managed quiet. She had learned to keep her own counsel, to do her work, to care for the people in this house through the specific language of provision, food, warmth, the small anticipations of need, because those were the forms of care that could exist within managed quiet without disturbing it. But she had always known it was not the right kind of quiet. On the morning of the 5th day, Dodo Petra stood at the kitchen window and watched Rosa in the garden with the baby, telling him something. She could see the movement of Rosa's lips, the tilt of her head toward the infant, the specific quality of attention that people bring to conversations they consider important regardless of whether the other person can understand them. She watched Alejandro emerge from the side door and stop at the garden's edge, watching Rosa with the expression Dodo Petra had been waiting for, without knowing she was waiting for it, for 22 years. Not the expression of a man looking at something he wants. The expression of a man looking at something he had not known he needed. Dodo Petra turned back to her bread dough. The house already felt different. Not dramatically. Not yet. But the managed quiet had a quality it had not had before, something listening within it. Something that had understood that the silence was optional. She needed the dough, and she thought, finally, and then she thought, Lord, let him not ruin it. In 3 years of working in the Vega household, Rosa had accumulated the following knowledge about Alejandro. He drank his coffee black, no sugar, in a specific cup. Not the same one every day, but from a rotation of 3 that he did not acknowledge as a preference, and that she had simply ensured were always available. He worked best between 5 in the morning and 1 in the afternoon. After 1, his patience for administrative matters decreased measurably. She had learned this from the quality of his responses to messages delivered at different hours, and had adjusted the household correspondence schedule accordingly. He was meticulous about certain things and careless about others, in a way that was not random but that corresponded to his assessment of what mattered. His clothing was immaculate. His desk was a controlled chaos that revealed, if you studied it long enough, its own organizing logic. He had not eaten lunch consistently in the 3 years she worked for him. She had taken to ensuring that Doda Petra left something at the kitchen corner at 1 o'clock, and it was eaten reliably, and he had never mentioned it. He did not sleep well. She had known this from the first week. The specific evidence of a man who operates on insufficient sleep, which is not dramatic but which accumulates in small ways over time. The coffee consumed in quantities that spoke not of preference but of necessity. The particular quality of his alertness at 5 in the morning, which was not the alertness of someone who had slept and woken, but the alertness of someone who had never quite stopped. The fact that she had, in 3 years, never seen his study dark before 2 in the morning. She had not known what to do with this knowledge. It was not the kind of knowledge that had a household application. It was the kind of knowledge you accumulate about a person when you have been paying attention, without intending to, for a long time. She had taken this knowledge with her when she left. She had carried it around for 18 months, like something she had accidentally borrowed and wasn't sure how to return. And then she had come back, and on the first morning, when he had set a bottle on the counter and said I did some reading about newborn feeding schedules, she had understood that he too had been accumulating the kind of knowledge that doesn't have an obvious application. The kind that arrives when you have been paying attention, without intending to, for a long time. Neither of them had said this. They had not needed to. The night before he asked her was one of those nights the city sometimes produced in late summer. The air warm but not heavy, the kind of warmth that feels like an invitation rather than a weight. The sky above the garden's high walls carrying a faint luminosity from the moon behind the clouds. Rosa was in the garden after Mateo was down, as she sometimes was in the evenings when the weather was like this, and the day had been long enough that she needed the particular relief of open air and no walls. She had her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had gone slightly cold, and she was not thinking about anything in particular, which was its own small luxury. She heard the door behind her. She knew from the sound of it. The specific rhythm of his footsteps on the stone path, which she had in 5 months, memorized as completely as she had memorized everything else about him. That it was Alejandro. He sat down on his bench across from her. They were quiet for a while. This was acceptable between them now. Had been acceptable for some time. The silence of people who have passed through the stage of performance and arrived at something real. She found it, these evenings, more restful than conversation, because the silence between them was not managed quiet but actual quiet, the quiet of two people who are together and not performing togetherness. I spoke to my lawyer today, Alejandro said. Rosa looked at him. About formal arrangements. For Mateo inheritance. Legal guardianship in the event of. He stopped. Contingency planning. The kind of planning that was probably overdue. Eyes everything in order. Wes, he paused. Your name is in the documents. She looked at him. As guardian, he said. If anything were to happen to me, before other arrangements are in place, you would have full legal authority. He paused. I should have done that earlier. You didn't know me earlier, Rosa said. Not really. I know you now. They were quiet again. She thought about what it meant. Her name in the documents of this house, this life. In the legal architecture of a family she had arrived in through a promise to a dead woman. She thought about how impossible it would have seemed, standing outside the gate in the rain, that any of this was where that night was going. She thought Lucia knew. She thought Lucia always knew more than she said. Thank you, she said. It was necessary, he said, not dismissing it. Just factual, the way he was about things he had decided. She looked at the garden, the warm night, the faint luminosity of the cloud-covered moon. She would have liked this, Rosa said. She did not specify. She did not need to. The garden. The evenings like this. Yes, Alejandro said she liked beautiful things. She had this ability to find the beautiful thing in whatever situation she was in. Even the bad ones. Rosa paused. I think it was a practice. She worked at it. It wasn't natural optimism. It was a decision she made every day. Alejandro was quiet for a moment. She raised a very good son, he said. She had 4 months, Rosa said. 8 weeks of healthy time and then. But yes, whatever she could, she did. He knows things, I think, that he can't articulate yet. Things she put in him. What things? Rosa thought about this. Warmth, she said. He is such a warm baby. Some infants are more, they're fine, they're healthy. They're normal. But he has this specific reaching quality, like he's always oriented toward people. Like he's always trying to make contact. She paused. That's her. Alejandro absorbed this. Rosa laughed, quietly, in the warm evening. Also her, she said. Definitely also her. He made the sound that was almost a laugh. The specific sound she had learned to listen for, which was his version of something lighter than his usual register. I want to. He started. Started again. I want to tell him about her. Properly, when he can understand. I want to. He was finding words carefully, the way he always did for things that mattered. I want him to know that she was someone real. Not just a story or a photograph. Someone who sang at work and named things and believed in alphabetical board books. Rosa looked at him. We can do that together, she said. We tell him together. He met her eyes. Together, he said. The word sat between them in the warm night, containing everything it meant and everything it was becoming. Tomorrow, in the garden, he would ask her. Tonight, the word together was already the answer. Thomas arranged the bench himself. This was not, strictly speaking, his job. His job was security, the identification and management of threats, the maintenance of the systems that kept the people in his care safe. The arrangement of memorial benches in Section 7 of cemeteries in Colonia San Rafael was not in any standard job description for a head of security. He arranged it himself anyway. He drove to the cemetery on a Thursday morning, because the Thursday morning had space in it that other mornings did not, and he stood in Section 7 and looked at the grave of Lucia Reyes for a while. It was as graves in public cemeteries go, modest, a simple stone, the name, the dates, a small vase holder. The flowers in the holder were silk, faded, the kind that someone had placed in the months after the death, and that had not been tended since. He removed them. He went to the florist 2 blocks from the cemetery entrance and purchased fresh ones. White, because they seemed right, though he could not have explained why. He returned and placed them. He spent approximately 15 minutes measuring the space beside the grave, identifying the sightlines, assessing the ground, in the specific way of a man whose primary mode of interaction with spaces is security analysis. He picked the spot for the bench. The bench arrived 2 weeks later, because he had selected a maker who did good work and did not rush, and because Mr. Vega had been very specific about it lasting 20 years. It was wood and iron, exactly as specified. A deep reddish wood that would weather well, iron fittings of the kind that required maintenance but would not deteriorate if maintained, which he had arranged for with the same maintenance service that handled the flowers. The plaque was the last thing. He had read it several times before placing it. The specific economy of the words, which contained several things at once without announcing them. He had thought, reading it, about the night Rosa Medina had come through the gate, and about the 17 years he had worked for Alejandro Vega, and about what it meant to spend your professional life in the service of protecting people, and then to encounter someone who was protecting something with no resources except her word. He placed the plaque. He stood at the bench for a moment. He did not say anything. He was not a man who said things to the dead, believing that the dead are past hearing, and that the living tend to speak to the dead for their own comfort, rather than the dead's benefit. But he had the thought, standing there, that if he were a man who spoke to the dead he would have said it worked. He is safe. She stayed. He drove back to the estate. He told Mr. Vega it was arranged. Vega said thank you in the voice he used when he meant it completely. Thomas nodded. He returned to his monitoring. Mateo at 5 months was opinionated about birds. He had developed what could only be described as a positional view on the birds that used the estate's garden wall as a thoroughfare, a view that he expressed with vocal commitment and significant hand activity whenever they appeared. His position appeared to be complex. He did not dislike the birds, based on the absence of distress in his expressions, but he had things to say about them, and he said them. The ceiling fan in the kitchen. He had identified this fan as a subject of extended philosophical interest at approximately 14 weeks, and had not revised this assessment. He watched it with the focused attention of a scholar pursuing a thesis, being horizontal when he was not ready to be horizontal. He had opinions about this that he expressed with an efficiency and volume that could fill a room. The specific texture of the knitted blanket Seora Catalina had sent, which arrived at 4.5 months, and which he appeared to consider superior to all other blankets, and would accept as a substitute for nothing. He was also opinionated, in a positive direction, about Alejandro's voice. He had been oriented toward it since the first week. Something in the frequency, Elena theorized, the specific lower register, that he found reassuring in the way that infants find things reassuring without knowing why. When Alejandro spoke in a room, Mateo turned toward the sound. When Alejandro held him and spoke, he went still in the specific way of someone receiving information they consider important. Rosa's hands. She had the specific handling technique that 8 weeks of practice had given her. The way she adjusted his weight, the specific grip, and his body knew it the way bodies know the things that were their first comfort. He reached for her hands when she was nearby. He had, from approximately week 3, grabbed her finger during feeding and not let go. The garden in afternoon light. He regarded this from whatever vantage point he was at, with an expression of satisfaction that suggested he considered it a reasonable environment, being told things. This was the one that both Rosa and Elena had noted, independently, in the same week. He responded to being spoken to directly, not in the simplified register of baby talk, but in the register of someone actually telling him something, with a quality of attention that suggested he was attempting to extract maximum information. His face did not perform incomprehension, performed engagement. He's listening, Elena said, one afternoon in the garden. Really listening. Not in the way they all do. They all respond to voice. He is trying to understand. He's Lucia's son? Rosa said. Yes, Elena agreed. And Alejandro's. Rosa looked at her. You think about one and you forget the other, Elena said. She was matter of fact about this, the way she was matter of fact about most things. He is both. Look at the way he sits with uncertainty. He doesn't cry when he doesn't understand something, he studies it. That's not Lucia's warmth, that's something else. Rosa thought about this. She thought about Alejandro, who had read about infant feeding schedules at 4 in the morning before he knew what he would decide. Who had sat on the floor. Who had come down, repeatedly, to the level of things he could have looked at from above. Yes, Elena said. That is exactly what I said. Rosa laughed. Mateo in her arms, turned toward the sound of the laugh with the expression of someone who has identified something worth paying attention to and is paying attention to it. And you, Elena said. He has learned things from you too. Babies learn from whoever holds them most. Rosa looked at the small person in her arms. The soft eyes, Lucia's eyes. The considering expression, his father's, and something else. Something she recognized because she had, perhaps, been the one to put it there, the willingness to reach. She pressed her lips to his forehead. She said, quietly, just for him. He grabbed her nose. She found it on the morning of the 14th day. She had been looking for the photograph. The one she had carried in her backpack on the night of the 6 miles. The photograph of her and Lucia at the laundry the year they met. Both of them laughing at something the camera had caught mid. Laughed so that neither of them looked dignified and both of them looked completely themselves. She had put it on the dresser the 2nd day, and had been rotating it occasionally. And she had set it down somewhere and now she could not find it. She was looking in the backpack when she found the envelope. She did not remember putting it there. She had packed the backpack 3 days before she came to the estate. After the phone calls that had not been answered. After the hospital. After the arrangements. In the specific useful fog of grief that allows you to function by refusing to feel. And she had packed it with the things Mateo would need. And she had been thorough. And she had not remembered packing this. The envelope was addressed to her in Lucia's handwriting. Lucia's handwriting was distinctive. Large letters with specific loops at the tails. The handwriting of someone who had learned to write late and had developed a personal system that owed little to conventional teaching. Rosa had received perhaps 30 letters in it over the years, before messaging made letters rare, and she had kept most of them in a box at her mother's house, because they were the handwriting of someone she loved. She sat on the edge of the bed with the envelope in her hands for a long time. Then she opened it. Lucia had written it, according to the date at the top, 8 days before she died. The handwriting was slightly less certain than usual. Tiredness, Rosa thought, or the specific effort of someone who is doing something important and is aware of its importance. But it was legible, and it was Lucia. It said, Rosa. If you're reading this, you did it. You kept the promise, which I knew you would because you are the most reliable person I have ever known, which is also sometimes annoying, but right now I am grateful. I want to tell you some things. I am not afraid. I want you to know that first because I think you will want to know it. I am tired and I am sad for Mateo and I am sad for you, but I am not afraid. I had enough time to do the important things. The important thing was him. You know that. The second important thing is this letter. Rosa, I need to tell you something I should have told you a long time ago. You have spent too much of your life taking care of other people's things, and not enough time letting anyone take care of yours. This is your quality and your fault simultaneously. I love you for it and I have watched it cost you things. You left the Vega household 18 months ago, and you told me it was because the contract ended, but I know you, Rosa. I know every face you make, and the face you made when you told me that was the face you make when you are being technically accurate and emotionally dishonest. You left because of feelings you didn't know what to do with. I am asking you, when you take Mateo to his father, and you will, I trust you completely, do it well, to not do what you always do. Do not deliver him and leave. Do not decide, as you always decide, that the responsible thing is to step back and not need anything and not ask for anything and manage alone. You have managed alone long enough. Stay. If there is something there to stay for. And Rosa, I think there is. I have thought about this man. I thought about him many times in the year after the Garza wedding, and what I thought was that was someone who knows how to pay attention. People who know how to pay attention are rare. They are worth staying for. Stay. Take care of my son. Let someone take care of you. I love you. I am glad you were my friend. I am glad you are the one I am trusting with this. Go home, Rosa. I think home might be the place you are going. All my love. Lucia. Rosa sat on the edge of the bed with the letter in her hands and did not manage it. She cried. Not quietly, not controlled, not the managed tears she had been permitting herself in small calibrated doses since the hospital. She cried the way grief requires when you have been denying it its full size, the way a river floods when you remove the dam. She cried for Lucia, who had written this letter knowing she might not wake up from the procedure that might have saved her. She cried for the 8 weeks Lucia had had and the years she had not had. She cried for herself. For the Rosa who had left 18 months ago carrying feelings she didn't know what to do with. For the Rosa who had walked 6 miles in the rain. For For the Rosa who was sitting on this bed in this house that was becoming something she had not expected it to become. She cried until she was done. Then she folded the letter carefully. She put it in the drawer of the nightstand, where it would stay. She washed her face. She went downstairs. Alejandro was in the kitchen. He looked at her face, at the evidence of what had happened, and said nothing for a moment. Then he poured her coffee and set it in front of her. She sat down. "I found a letter," she said. "From Lucia. Written before she died." "She told me to stay?" Rosa said. He looked at her. "She said she thought home might be the place I was going." Rosa wrapped both hands around the mug. She was right. She was usually right about things. Alejandro was quiet for a long moment. "She knew you well," he said. "Better than anyone," Rosa said. "She knew me better than anyone." She looked at her coffee, then at him. "I thought you should know," she said, "that it wasn't only the promise, that she wanted this. Not this specifically, she couldn't have known the specific. But she wanted me to not leave too soon. She wanted me to stay long enough to see what was here." He held her gaze. "Thank you for telling me," he said. "Thank you for being what she thought was here," Rosa said. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, the morning was beginning. Somewhere upstairs, Mateo had not yet woken, and was conducting his private negotiations with sleep. Alejandro reached across the counter and put his hand over hers. He did not say anything. She turned her hand and held his. They stayed like that for a while, in the kitchen, in the morning.